At my daughter's holiday dinner party, my son-in-law picked up Grace's old quilting box and dropped it into the recycling bin by the back door. Not threw it, just set it in there with 2 fingers the way you'd discard a paper cup. Dad, Ruby's 8 years old. She doesn't need a box of old thread. My granddaughter was standing 4 feet away in her Christmas dress, watching every second of it. I didn't say a word. I walked to the bin, lifted the box out, and held it against my chest. The lacquer was cold from the draft near the door. I drove home with it on the passenger seat, still wrapped in the red ribbon I'd tied that morning. 2 days later, my old friend Amos opened it on his workbench in the back of his antique shop on Morse Road, and he went very quiet in a way that told me everything had shifted. What Grace had sealed inside that box, hidden so carefully that I'd held it 100 times and never noticed, was about to dismantle every plan my son-in-law thought he'd already won. My name is Edgar Morrow. I'm 67 years old. I taught woodshop at Roosevelt High for 31 years, which means I understand the difference between something built to last and something built to impress. Grace and I were married for 43 years before pancreatic cancer took her 14 months ago. We raised our daughter in a 3-bedroom house in Clintonville, drove used cars, took 1 vacation a year to somewhere within a day's drive, and saved carefully. It wasn't a glamorous life. It was a good one. Grace had been a registered nurse at Ohio Health for 32 years. She believed in showing up, for patients, for family, for anyone who needed her. She'd made that quilting box herself the winter Ruby was born, painting blue morning glories along the lid because Ruby came home from the hospital in a blanket covered in flowers. Grace gave it to me the last Christmas before her diagnosis, saying she wanted Ruby to have it someday when she was old enough to understand what it meant. I'd kept it on the bookshelf in the living room for 2 years, between her nursing school photograph and the ceramic cardinal she bought at a church sale in 2004. My daughter and her husband live in a newer development in Dublin, west of Columbus. Their house has an open floor plan, a wine rack built into the kitchen island, and a guest bathroom larger than the bedroom Grace and I shared for 20 years. My son-in-law works in commercial real estate development. He's 41, which means he's young enough to still believe that confidence and a good suit are the same thing as competent. He'd never been unkind to me directly, just consistently, thoroughly uninterested. At family dinners, he talked about deals and square footage and interest rates. He checked his phone during Grace's memorial. I noticed. I said nothing. The holiday dinner was a work event dressed up as a family occasion. 12 people at a table that seated 14. Wine I couldn't identify by name. A caterer setting things on the counter in matching white dishes. Ruby found me near the door when I arrived and grabbed my hand immediately. She had Grace's dark eyes and the habit of tucking her chin down when she was nervous. She'd been doing that more lately. I'd brought the quilting box, wrapped it carefully that morning, cut the ribbon the way Grace always did. No loops, just a clean bow. When I set it on the counter and told Ruby it was from me and from Grandma, her face changed the way children's faces do when something matters. My son-in-law appeared before she could open it. He looked at the box, looked at the ribbon, looked at me, picked it up with 2 fingers, turned it over once like he was checking a price tag at a garage sale, and set it in the recycling bin by the back door. "Seriously, Dad," he said, not angry amused. "Ruby's 8. She doesn't need a box of old thread." The room didn't go silent. That's what happens in movies. In real life, 2 of his colleagues kept talking about a zoning board meeting in Westerville, and the caterer kept arranging things on platters, and Ruby just stood there with her mouth slightly open. I watched my son-in-law walk back to his guests and start laughing at something on a colleague's phone. I walked to the bin, took the box out, wiped the condensation off the lid with my sleeve. The back door had been open, and the lacquer had gotten damp. Tucked it under my arm. My daughter appeared at my elbow. "Dad, just leave it," she said quietly. "He didn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said. I said goodbye to Ruby, who had gone very still the way she did when she didn't want to cry in front of people. I told her I'd call her tomorrow. She nodded. I walked out. The drive home took 40 minutes. The box sat on the passenger seat in its red ribbon. I kept the radio off. Grace had given me this box with specific words. She was clear in the way she was always clear when something was important. Ruby should have this when the time is right. Keep it safe, Edgar. Don't let anyone tell you it's not worth keeping. I'd thought at the time she meant the sentimental value, the hours she'd spent painting those morning glories, the way Ruby's name was carved faintly on the bottom in Grace's handwriting. I thought she meant to protect its memory. That night I set the box on the kitchen table, where we'd eaten 10,000 meals together, made coffee, sat with it, and then I noticed what I should have noticed before. I'd made enough things with my hands over 31 years to understand proportion. The box was 6 inches deep on the outside. The interior, when I looked carefully, was maybe 4. The discrepancy wasn't obvious. Grace had lined it beautifully, dark blue velvet, neatly fitted. But 2 inches of solid base made no engineering sense for a box this size. I pressed the interior floor, felt a slight give at one corner. Grace had been a practical woman. She was also, when she wanted to be, meticulous in ways that didn't always announce themselves. I put the box in the coat closet and didn't sleep much. Amos Brierly had been repairing and restoring antiques from a shop on Morse Road for 38 years. We'd met in 1991 at an estate auction in Gahana, both of us, reaching for the same oak roll-top desk at the same moment. He was 70 now, with hands that still worked with extraordinary patience. He'd known Grace. He'd come to her memorial and brought a covered dish and stayed until almost everyone else had left. I brought the box to him on a Tuesday morning, explained what had happened at the dinner. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always valued about Amos. He examined the box under his work light for several minutes, turning it slowly, running his thumb along the seams. Then he picked up a thin tool from the tray beside him. "The joinery on this base is heavier than it needs to be," he said quietly. "She built a false floor." He pressed a specific point along the interior edge. There was a soft click. The velvet-lined panel lifted on a small brass hinge, revealing a compartment fitted with the same precision Grace brought to everything she made. Inside, folded flat and sealed in clear archival sleeves, 4 documents. Amos lifted the first one and held it to the light. "Stock certificates," he said. I leaned in. The paper was heavy, official, dated October 14, 2009. The company name across the top, MedPath Diagnostics, Inc. below it, Certificate of Common Stock, 12%, 12 Cygnus equity interest. Grace's signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. 4 certificates, each representing $15,000. $60,000 total, converted into a 12% founding stake in a company I had never once heard her mention. Beneath the certificates, a folded letter. The paper had yellowed at the edges. "For Ruby," it began. Amos stepped back and gave me room. Grace wrote that she had invested money her mother had left her. Money she'd never mentioned to me because she wanted it to be entirely her own decision, in a small medical diagnostic startup founded by a former Ohio Health colleague she'd trusted for 20 years. She'd believed in the technology. She'd registered the shares as a trust for Ruby specifically, because she wanted Ruby to have something that was hers alone, something her parents couldn't redirect. She wrote, "If the investment grows, it belongs to Ruby. If it comes to nothing, that's all right too. What matters is that I tried to give her something that couldn't be taken." Near the end, she'd written something else, something that changed the shape of the last 14 months in my memory. "Edgar, if you're reading this, it means you kept the box safe. I knew you would. I also need you to know something about your son-in-law. In the spring before I got sick, I discovered he had been quietly researching the transfer of your retirement accounts and our joint property. He'd accessed your financial records without your knowledge. I found paperwork at the house that he didn't know I'd seen. He has been in serious financial trouble for longer than our daughter knows. I don't say this to alarm you, but to prepare you. If anything happens to me, watch carefully. Watch how he treats Ruby. Watch whether he tries to access what belongs to you or to her. You'll know what to do when the time comes. All my love." I read it 3 times. Amos had his phone out. He turned the screen toward me. MedPath Diagnostics had been acquired by Cascade Health Systems in March of 2022. Acquisition price, $17.8 million. 12% of that was $2,136,000. The workbench was solid under my hands. I held onto it anyway. Grace had invested $60,000 of her own money, never said a word about it, and left her granddaughter over $2 million from a hospital bed while she was dying, and my son-in-law had dropped the proof of it into a recycling bin. I asked Amos to close the compartment. The box looked exactly as it always had. Morning Glories, Ruby's name along the bottom, the ribbon still loosely around the lid. I drove to see a lawyer. Josephine Park had practiced elder law in Columbus for 22 years. She had an office on High Street, diplomas from Ohio State and Case Western on the wall, and the particular calm of someone who has heard most things before and is rarely surprised by any of them. She'd handled Grace's estate planning. She knew the family. She reviewed each document carefully, then set down her pen. "The trust registration is valid," she said. "Grace established it correctly, separate from marital assets, filed properly in Franklin County, Ruby named as sole beneficiary. The shares and their proceeds belong to Ruby alone. Your son-in-law has no legal claim on any of it." She paused. "But he will try." She pulled something up on her screen and turned it toward me. My son-in-law's development company had filed for creditor protection 18 months ago. The reorganization had failed. He was personally liable for approximately $1.4 million in outstanding loan guarantees, 2 civil judgments from contractors who hadn't been paid, his business license flagged. "He's desperate," Josephine said. "And desperate men look for leverage wherever they can find it. If he discovers that Ruby's trust exists and that you control it, he'll move against you. The most likely avenue is a competency challenge, arguing that your age and your grief have impaired your ability to serve as trustee. He'll find a doctor willing to say what he needs said. He'll frame the whole thing as concern for you." She met my eyes. "He'll make it look like love." "What do we do?" I asked. She turned to a clean page on her legal pad. "We move first." 2 weeks passed. Josephine filed the trust validation with the probate court. She connected me with a neurologist at OSU Wexner Medical Center for a full cognitive evaluation. Not because there was any doubt, but because she wanted documentation on record before doubt could be manufactured. The neurologist's written report concluded, my cognitive function was fully intact across all tested domains. She said I could share it with anyone who needed to see it. The investigator Josephine hired came back with more. 18 months before Grace's death, my son-in-law had retained an attorney to explore transferring my retirement accounts into a jointly managed vehicle. The inquiry went nowhere legally, but the paper trail existed. 4 months after Grace's memorial, he'd contacted Ohio Health's HR department asking about benefits still owed to the estate of a former employee. He'd given my daughter's name as point of contact. He was hunting for money anywhere it might surface. And there was something else. Ruby's school counselor at Wycliffe Progressive had filed 3 internal notes over the past year. Ruby arrived on Monday mornings withdrawn and reluctant to speak. Ruby flinched when raised voices occurred in the hallway. The most recent entry read, "Ruby has expressed that she feels she needs to be quiet and invisible at home so as not to cause problems. This language is concerning and warrants follow-up with the family." I sat at Josephine's conference table and read those notes without moving. I thought about Ruby standing by the back door in her Christmas dress, chin tucked down, watching the box go into the bin, holding herself completely still. Grace had known. She'd feared this specific thing, and she'd built the escape hatch before she ran out of time to protect Ruby herself. The call from my son-in-law came on a Thursday evening. He didn't bother with preamble. "I know you have documents from Grace," he said. "Whatever you think you found, it's complicated by the fact that she was already ill when she made those arrangements. Her judgment at that stage was..." "Her judgment was excellent," I said. A pause. When he spoke again, his voice shifted into something meant to sound reasonable. "Edgar, you're 67 years old. You're grieving. You've been living alone for over a year. Nobody doubts that you love Ruby, but people are concerned about your ability to manage complex financial matters at this stage. Natalie and I are thinking it might be better for everyone if we stepped in." "I'll think about what you've said," I told him. "Good. And whatever's in that box, it's part of Grace's estate. The family needs to handle this together." "I'll be in touch," I said, and ended the call. I called Josephine. She said, "He just handed us everything we need." She filed the emergency motion the following morning. We had the conservatorship threat recorded. I'd had the voice memo app running on her earlier advice. We had the cognitive evaluation clearing me. We had the investigator's findings on my son-in-law's financial desperation and his prior attempts to access Grace's estate. We had the school counselor's notes documenting Ruby's anxiety at home. And we had Grace's letter, a woman's careful, deliberate warning, written in her own hand, explaining exactly what she feared and exactly what she'd done about it. The hearing was on a Tuesday in January. Franklin County Probate Court, 3rd floor. Josephine sat beside me. My son-in-law sat across the aisle with his attorney. My daughter sat next to her husband, not looking at me. He testified first. He'd practiced the concerned son-in-law voice. He talked about my age, my isolation, my grief. He said they were only trying to protect me. He suggested the trust documents might reflect diminished clarity on Grace's part near the end. Josephine cross-examined him with the phone recording, playing through the courtroom speakers. His own words about my ability to manage complex financial matters. His own words about Grace's judgment being compromised. She asked what professional assessment he'd obtained before reaching those conclusions. He hadn't obtained one. She asked whether he'd contacted Ohio Health HR regarding Grace's estate. He paused too long before answering. She submitted the investigator's findings, the civil judgments, the failed reorganization, the $1.4 million in personal liability. The school counselor read her notes aloud in the quiet room, the language about Ruby wanting to be quiet and invisible, the Monday mornings, the flinching. I took the stand and answered Josephine's questions directly. I described the dinner party, the recycling bin, what Amos had found, and what Grace had written. 43 years of marriage to a woman who was more careful and more deliberate than anyone I'd ever known, who had made a hidden compartment in a handmade box to protect her granddaughter from something she could see coming and couldn't stop from a hospital bed. The judge asked me one question directly. "Mr. Morrow, what do you want for your granddaughter?" "I want her to feel safe," I said. "I want her to know that when someone tells her she matters, they mean it. And I want her to have what her grandmother worked 40 years to give her." The ruling came 40 minutes after testimony closed. Trust validated. Edgar Morrow confirmed as trustee. Petition to remove him denied. Referral to Franklin County Children's Services for investigation of the home environment. My son-in-law referred to the county prosecutor for review of his prior inquiries into Grace's estate. Josephine's hand was on my arm before I fully understood the judge had finished speaking. Outside, the January air was sharp and gray, the kind of Ohio cold that doesn't apologize. A pigeon landed on the courthouse railing and immediately left again, like it had remembered somewhere better to be. 2 months later, Ruby came to live with me. Children's Services had completed their investigation. The pattern the school counselor had documented, combined with what had come out in the hearing, was sufficient. My daughter had not contested the temporary placement. Whatever had cracked open between her and her husband in the weeks since the ruling, she had gone very quiet and signed the agreement without speaking to me directly. Ruby arrived on a Wednesday evening with 2 duffel bags and a backpack. She stood in my living room and looked immediately at the quilting box on the bookshelf, back where it always was, between Grace's nursing school photo and the ceramic cardinal. "Is that Grandma's?" she asked. "It is. She wanted you to have it." Ruby walked to the shelf and touched one of the painted morning glories with one finger, very carefully. "He threw it away," she said, not as an accusation, just something she needed to say out loud. "He did. I went and got it back." She looked at me. "Why didn't you say anything to him at the party?" "Because some things don't need to be argued about," I said. "They just need to be protected." She thought about that for a moment. Then she asked if she could open it. We sat at the kitchen table. I showed her the small music mechanism Grace had fitted in the lid, just 12 notes of a lullaby she used to hum when Ruby was a baby. Ruby listened with her hands flat on the table and her eyes closed. The first weeks were not simple. Ruby was 8 years old and had spent a year learning to take up as little space as possible. She asked permission before she opened the refrigerator. She apologized when she made noise. She woke in the night and I could hear her lying still in the dark, not wanting to be a problem. I didn't try to fix all of it at once. I made breakfast every morning and didn't rush her to eat it. I picked her up from school at 3 o'clock every day, and we stopped for hot chocolate at the place on Indianola that had the good whipped cream, and I asked about her day, in a way that didn't require any particular answer. On weekends, we went to the workshop in the garage, and I taught her how to sand with the grain and how to tell what a piece of wood wanted to become. She turned out to have a natural patience for it. Her school counselor called me after the 3rd week. "I don't know what you're doing," she said, "but keep doing it." She laughed today. A real laugh. I hadn't heard that from her before. Grace's letter sat in the hidden compartment of the quilting box, where I'd returned it after the hearing. I hadn't decided yet whether to tell Ruby everything, the trust, the money, the full shape of what her grandmother had done. She was 8. There was time. What I knew was that Grace had spent the last year of her life quietly. The way she did everything, not in spite of the illness but alongside it, using whatever days she had left to make sure that Ruby would be all right, even in the situations Grace wouldn't live to see. On a Saturday morning in March, Ruby came into the kitchen while I was making eggs and said, without looking up from the book she was carrying, "Grandpa, do you think Grandma knew I'd end up here?" I turned the burner down. "I think she hoped," I said. Ruby considered that. "Did she know about the box? What was inside it?" "She put it there herself." Then she knew. Ruby set her book on the table and pulled out a chair. She was making sure you'd find it. "That's what I think too." She nodded slowly, working it out. She couldn't fix it herself, so she fixed it for after. "That's exactly right," I said. She looked at me for a moment with Grace's eyes. "Okay," she said, "can I have orange juice?" I poured her a glass and finished the eggs, and we ate breakfast together while the morning light came through the window over the same window Grace had stood at for 40 years, watching the yard move through every season. The quilting box sat on the bookshelf in the next room. Morning glories faded slightly from years of light. Ruby's name carved faint along the bottom, holding everything Grace had put inside it. The love, the forethought, the quiet and absolute refusal to leave the people she loved unprotected. Some legacies are built with money. Some are built with time. Grace had used both carefully, without ever making a sound about it, and handed them to me to carry forward. I had no intention of dropping them.